So people come into my office all the time and they ask, should I incorporate my small business? And I say, well, does a bear in the woods? Does the Pope wear a funny hat? Yeah, he do. So yeah, you should incorporate your business. Now listen, if you're doing business with any type of regularity, any type of frequency, you need to incorporate. Don't think about it. Don't sleep on it. You need to incorporate and incorporate now. You're going to learn why in today's episode. My name is Joshua Roberts, attorney at law, and you are watching Lawyer Up. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at incorporating. We're going to look at what it means to incorporate, and we're going to look at why people do it. And the aim of this video is towards small business owners. If you've got a huge business, then you've probably already incorporated. So we're looking at those scenarios where we have small business owners that are thinking about, should I incorporate? So today we're going to focus on what it means to incorporate and why people do it. We will get into, in another video on this channel, the different types of corporate structures and which makes the most sense for your particular small business. But today we're just going to focus generally on incorporating and what that means. And do me a favor, if you enjoy the video, hit that like button. If you have a question or something to say, comment below. If you would like more information about the law and legal issues and topics such as these, then subscribe to the channel. And as always, share me on social media. And remember, I am a lawyer, but I am not your lawyer. So if you need advice specific to your legal situation, then you should lawyer up with an attorney in your area. So let's talk generally about what it means to incorporate. It's kind of a strange word. People say, should I incorporate? Should you incorporate? Did he incorporate? Should we incorporate? What does incorporate even mean? Well, it's kind of a strange concept. But essentially what you're doing is you're creating this separate entity from which you will be doing business. This entity is separate and apart from yourself and your personal endeavors. And this new entity will have to be registered with the state so that the government knows that it exists. And this entity will have to be assigned a tax identification number so that the government can follow it and tax it if it makes any money, right? And I tell people it's kind of like having a baby, right? You have created this new thing that is separate and apart from you. And that thing, it has to be certified that it exists. And so the baby gets a birth certificate so the government knows that that human exists. And then that baby gets a social security number so the government can, again, monitor it. And if it does anything of any value or makes any money, tax it. Well, it's kind of the same when you incorporate. You file paperwork with the state, and it's the Secretary of State in all 50 states that records the documents. And then they issue your independent entity a birth certificate, right? They call that a state charter that you get that certifies that you have created this independent entity. And then you get it a tax ID number. This new independent entity, this business, well, it needs a social security number, right? We call that an EIN number, an employer identification number, or a tax ID number. That essentially is the federal government giving this new creature, this new creation, a social security number so that it can tax it. So the next question is why? Why do people incorporate? And it's quite simple. It's so they can separate their business dealings from their personal dealings. You're creating something independent of your personal life and your personal assets to handle your business situations. And I sometimes explain this to clients through a bucket analogy. I say you have bucket A over here, and in that bucket you put your personal assets. You put your house, you put your car, you put your personal checking account, and any assets that you have personally goes into your personal bucket. And then over here, you're creating this new separate business bucket. And inside that, it goes the business's assets. Any buildings or real estate or property that it might own, it goes into the separate bucket. So you have a business bucket and you have a personal bucket. And the significance of separating these things out is that the law provides protection. If you're engaged in a business transaction and something happens and you get sued, then the assets that are subject to being potentially executed against by creditors or other litigants in the lawsuit are limited to your business bucket. That means if you were to happen to get sued through an incorporated entity, that the items in your personal bucket are going to be protected. That's one of the main reasons why people incorporate. So when we talk about reason number one to incorporate, it is the personal asset protection. It is the liability protection that comes with creating this separate corporate entity. And in this way, your business liabilities are separate from your personal liabilities. So if, God forbid, something happens in your business endeavor and you get sued and they get a judgment, it's not your house on the line. It's not your checking account on the line. It's not your car on the line. It's limited to the assets that are owned by the business. And it's an important distinction which we will get into in more detail in my separate video on the different types of corporate structures. But if you're a sole proprietorship, just some guy or gal out there doing your thing without incorporating, or even a partnership with you and a buddy are going about your business, maybe you own a lawn care company or something, and you haven't recorded anything with the state, you haven't incorporated, then you haven't created a separate entity, and your business dealings are putting your personal assets that are in your personal bucket at risk. That's why it's important to always incorporate if you're engaged in any type of business activity at any significant level. Now, the second reason that a lot of people incorporate is for name protection. If you have a business name and you may put it in the phone book, you may have a website, you may have a lot of advertising that you've spent dollars on that you want associated with your particular business. Say you're ABC Moving Company. You want that name protected. If you incorporate, that name is yours and it is yours alone. And you can protect and fight for that name if somebody else were to use it. If you don't incorporate, that name isn't protected. I have had several people come into my office and say, hey, I was doing business as a 123 Lawnscaping Company, and these people sent me a cease and desist order. And I looked at it and look it up on the Secretary of State's website and say, yeah, they've incorporated. They have taken that name and protected it. And just because you've been doing business as a certain name or filed a fictitious name registration, that doesn't give you name protection. And if you don't incorporate, you could lose thousands and thousands of advertising dollars where you've spent money promoting that particular name without any protection whatsoever. So you'll want to protect your name. And recall that there is something called a DBA filing, a fictitious name registration filing, where people will file with the Secretary of State that they're doing business under this name. That doesn't provide you with any name protection. People think that it does. It's a common misconception, but it does not. A DBA filing protects nothing. Now, the third reason why people incorporate is because there are tax benefits to doing so. When you incorporate, you can choose kind of how you want to be taxed depending upon the entity. You can be taxed as a subchapter S corporation. You can be taxed sometimes as a partnership or as what's called a disregarded entity, depending upon the structure, which we will talk about in my other video. Now, it's important to note, I'm not an accountant, I'm a lawyer, so I don't give tax advice. So I'm not going to get into the specifics of what these tax advantages are. However, there are significant business deductions that can be taken in conjunction with your business operations, including salaries and inventory and those types of expenses that may or may not be otherwise deductible under a different unincorporated format. So I tell people it's a good idea to lawyer up, And when you're going to incorporate your business, it's also a good idea to accountant up, because they are worth their weight in gold in keeping you out of trouble with the IRS. And last but not least, there's this general statement that incorporating adds legitimacy to the business operations. If you see Inc. or LLC after a name, it just gives you some sense of security that this business either has been around for a while or they are going to be around for a while because they have taken the time and the effort of incorporating. Just seeing a sticker or a magnet slapped to the side of some guy's truck that says Handyman Construction when you know they're not incorporated doesn't foster any real sense of security in doing business with that entity. So just for the overall general idea of legitimacy, some people will incorporate because it gives a sense of security to the customer base that they have. And also when you're banking and doing those types of things, they want you to have a incorporated entity. They're going to ask you for your charter number that's issued from the state you incorporate in. They'll ask you for your EIN number or your tax number in order to create a separate account for your separate business entity. So that's the episode on incorporating. We've talked about what it means and why people do it. Now, in our next video, we're going to talk about the various types of corporations that exist out there, whether we're talking about an LLC or a corporation or other corporate entity that might make the best sense for your business. So be sure to check out that video on this channel. If you enjoyed today's video, hit that like button. If you got a question, comment below. If you want to know more about legal topics, then subscribe to the channel. And as always, I love it when you share me on social media. My name is Joshua Roberts, attorney at law, and you've been watching Lawyer Up.
Send lawyers, guns, and money. Dad, get me out of this.